The champagne cork exploded over the marina deck while the HOA unveiled a $12 million lake resort on my land. Their banners covered my old shoreline, their docks cut into my family's waterline, and their investors were already selling memberships to half the county. A security guard blocked the access gate I installed myself. Behind him, the resort's pumps hummed from the same control line I still owned. Then Victoria Hayes stepped onto the stage and called it a community victory. That was her first real mistake. She was celebrating on top of a system she had never bothered to understand. The wind carried the smell of lake water, diesel, and fresh cedar across the crowd. I stood near the back in a worn gray suit, holding a leather folder under my arm. Nobody looked at me twice. That suited me fine. My name is Ethan Walker. I am 38 years old, and I used to design water control systems for private reservoirs across Montana. But Walker Lake was not a job. It was home. The resort behind Victoria had a glass-front restaurant, 20 rental cabins, 2 boat slips, and a wooden boardwalk wrapped around the North Shore. That North Shore had been ours since my grandfather drove the first survey stake into the clay. Now there were gold balloons tied to it. A jazz band played near the fire pit. Realtors smiled beside glossy brochures. Men in navy sport coats shook hands like money had already cleared. Every few seconds the dock lights flickered. I noticed that before anyone else did. The pump house still pulled through our original service conduit. The same conduit my father warned me never to sign away. Victoria lifted her champagne glass. Her white blazer glowed under the noon sun. She looked polished, calm, untouchable. Lakeside Pines has transformed unused land into prosperity, she said. The crowd clapped. The sound rolled across the water and came back thin. Unused land? My fingers tightened around the folder. I could still see my father standing on that same bank, mud on his boots, teaching me how to clear the intake screens before winter. I could still hear the scrape of his wrench against the old pump housing. But I did not move. Not yet. 2 county commissioners stood beside Victoria. So did the bank officer who financed the expansion. So did a man from the title company who kept avoiding my eyes. That was the part most people missed. This was not one arrogant neighbor building a dock over a property line. This was an entire machine pretending the line had never existed. Then a black SUV rolled up beside the gate. 2 more security guards stepped out. One pointed toward my truck parked near the gravel turnout. I watched his mouth move before I heard the words. That vehicle needs to be removed. The guard walked toward me with a clipboard. His boots clicked on the new boardwalk they had laid over my grandfather's stone path. He told me this was private HOA property now. His voice stayed flat. Trained. Rehearsed. Behind him, Victoria smiled from the stage as if the lake itself had applauded her. I opened the leather folder just enough to touch the old paper inside. The deed was there. So was the survey map. So was the one page that made their grand opening much bigger than a trespassing dispute. Then the gate keypad flashed red behind him. The guard turned toward the flashing keypad and frowned. The red light blinked 3 times, then went dark. Around us, conversation started to slow. People noticed when technology stopped working. Especially expensive technology. The breeze pushed small waves against the marina pilings with a hollow knocking sound. The smell of fresh lumber mixed with lake water drifted across the shoreline. I slipped the folder closed and watched the guard touch his earpiece. He looked confused. That was new. Up on the stage, Victoria kept talking about growth, investment, and community vision. Her voice carried through the speakers. The crowd applauded again. Most of them had no idea where they were standing. Most of them had never seen this lake before the resort arrived. They only knew the polished version. The version printed on brochures. The version wrapped in marketing slogans. But long before the boardwalk, before the cabins, before the marina lights reflected across the water, there was Walker Lake. My grandfather built the first retaining wall here in 1952. Not because he wanted a resort. Not because he wanted tourists. He built it because ranchers downstream needed stable water during dry summers. The old photographs still sat inside my cabin. Black and white images. Men covered in dirt. Pickup trucks with rounded fenders. Survey stakes driven into open ground. Every inch of that shoreline carried a memory. I learned to fish here before I learned to drive. I learned how to repair pumps before I learned algebra. Every winter, my father and I inspected the intake lines together. He treated the lake like family. The lake returned the favor. Another burst of applause snapped me back to the present. Victoria had finished her speech. Investors gathered near the ribbon stretched across the main boardwalk entrance. Cameras came out. Phones lifted into the air. The sunlight reflected off hundreds of windows behind them. The entire resort gleamed like a magazine advertisement. That was part of the problem. It looked too perfect. A man in an expensive suit approached Victoria and pointed toward the gate. She glanced over. For a fraction of a second, her smile faded. Then it returned. Smooth. Controlled. Practiced. She whispered something to one of her assistants. The assistant hurried away. I had seen that look before. People wore it when a small problem appeared during a big event. They assumed it could be handled quietly. They assumed the problem was temporary. A golf cart rolled toward the pump house near the north shoreline. 2 maintenance workers jumped out. One opened a control panel. The other spoke into a radio. Neither looked happy. The dock lights flickered again. Then several went dark completely. Guests started noticing now. Heads turned. Questions spread through the crowd. Small at first. Then faster. Victoria stepped away from the ribbon ceremony and walked toward the maintenance crew. Her heels clicked sharply against the wooden planks. She was smiling. But her pace had changed. I watched her disappear behind the pump house. Less than a minute later, she reappeared. The smile was gone. And for the first time all afternoon, she looked directly at me. Victoria held my stare for several seconds. The noise around us seemed to fade. The laughter. The music. The clinking glasses. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the calculation behind her eyes. She was trying to figure out why I was still standing there. Most people would have left after being told the property belonged to someone else. Most people would have accepted the signs, the fences, the security guards, and the polished speeches. I never did. A maintenance worker jogged past her carrying a toolbox. Another followed with a tablet in his hand. They disappeared into the pump house. The heavy metal doors slammed shut behind them. A few moments later, the marina lights flickered again. Then half the dock went dark. A murmur spread through the crowd. Investors exchanged looks. Several guests pulled out their phones. The resort suddenly felt less perfect. Victoria started walking toward me. Her pace was measured. Controlled. Her assistant followed 3 steps behind carrying a clipboard. The closer she got, the stronger her perfume became. Expensive. Sharp. Designed to leave an impression. Mr. Walker, she said. Her smile returned. I was told you were causing confusion among our guests. I looked past her toward the water. Small waves tapped against the dock supports. The sound reminded me of summers long before any of these buildings existed. Interesting choice of words, I said. Her jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. Then it disappeared. This is a private event. Is it? I asked. The assistant shifted uncomfortably. Victoria folded her arms. Behind her, the ribbon ceremony had stalled. People were waiting. Cameras were waiting. The local news crew was waiting. Nobody likes delays when money is involved. You should leave before this becomes embarrassing, she said quietly. There it was. Not anger. Not concern. Confidence. The kind that comes from believing every important person is already on your side. I had seen it before. Years earlier, she approached me with offers to buy shoreline access. Then larger offers. Then offers so generous that friends told me I was crazy for refusing. Each time I said no. Not because the land was worth more. Because it was not for sale. She never understood that. 2. Victoria, everything had a price. The lake. The shoreline. The history. The people. Everything. Another light went out along the boardwalk. Several guests actually stopped talking and looked around. The maintenance crew emerged from the pump house again. Their faces looked worse than before. One of them pointed toward a utility marker near the shoreline. The same marker my father installed almost 20 years ago. Victoria followed his gesture. Then she looked back at me. This time the confidence slipped. Only slightly. But I saw it. A crack in the foundation. She stepped closer. "What exactly are you doing here?" she asked. I opened the leather folder just enough for her to glimpse the edge of an old survey map. The color drained from her face so quickly it almost looked unreal. For the first time all afternoon, Victoria Hayes stopped acting like she owned the lake. Victoria's eyes locked onto the survey map for less than a second before she forced a smile back onto her face. It was a good smile. Practiced. The kind people use when cameras are nearby and investors are listening. "I think there has been some misunderstanding," she said. Her assistant shifted nervously beside her. Behind us, the crowd continued to wait for the ribbon cutting. The delay was becoming impossible to hide. A reporter lowered his camera and glanced toward the pump house. 2 maintenance workers were still arguing near the control panels. One kept pointing toward the utility marker by the shoreline. Victoria noticed that too. "You should not be showing outdated documents at a public event," she said quietly. "Outdated?" I asked. The breeze lifted the edge of the map. The old paper crackled softly in my hand. For a moment neither of us spoke. The lake filled the silence. Small waves rolled against the marina supports. The hollow knocking sound echoed beneath the docks. Then one of the restaurant lights went dark. Several guests looked up immediately. Another followed. A few people began pulling out their phones. The atmosphere had changed. 5 minutes earlier everyone had been celebrating. Now they were watching. Victoria took a slow breath. "Excuse us," she told her assistant. The woman stepped back. Victoria lowered her voice. "How much do you want?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. Money was always her first solution. "You still think this is about a price?" I said. Her expression hardened. There it was. The real Victoria Hayes. The version hidden beneath community speeches and fundraising dinners. She glanced toward the stage where county officials were waiting. Then back at me. Calculating again. Looking for an exit. Looking for control. "The development is complete," she said. "There are contracts. Investors. Banks." She stopped talking. The words hung there by themselves. Investors. Banks. Contracts. Bigger pieces of the machine were starting to show. A maintenance cart suddenly raced down the boardwalk. Its tires rattled across the planks. The driver stopped beside Victoria and whispered something into her ear. I watched the color leave her face again. This time it stayed gone. She turned sharply toward the shoreline. The utility marker stood exactly where it always had. Half buried in grass. Ignored by nearly everyone. Not by me. My father installed that marker after a major system upgrade nearly 20 years earlier. Every critical service line on the property traced back to it. Every single one. Victoria started walking toward the marker. Fast. Her assistant hurried behind her. 2 maintenance workers followed. So did one of the county commissioners. Curiosity was spreading now. Guests began drifting in the same direction. Conversation stopped. Music faded into the background. Even the band seemed unsure whether to keep playing. I remained where I was. The leather folder felt heavier than before. Not because of the papers inside. Because of what they connected together. The deed. The survey maps. The utility easements. The shoreline records. Pieces that meant very little alone. Pieces that became dangerous when combined. Victoria crouched beside the marker and brushed dirt away with her hand. Then she saw what was stamped into the metal plate. Victoria stared at the metal plate as if it had suddenly appeared from nowhere. The crowd gathered closer. Expensive shoes pressed into the grass. Along the shoreline, conversations dropped into whispers. The lake breeze carried the smell of cedar and sunscreen through the afternoon heat. One of the maintenance supervisors knelt beside her and brushed away more dirt. The stamped lettering became fully visible. Walker Utility Easement. Installed 2004. Nobody said a word for several seconds. Then the county commissioner adjusted his glasses and leaned forward for a better look. Victoria stood up quickly. Too quickly. Her assistant nearly stumbled trying to keep pace. "This does not prove ownership," she said. Her voice was louder now. "Not for me. For everyone listening." The commissioner looked from the marker to me. Then back to Victoria. He seemed uncomfortable. I had seen that expression before. People wear it when they realize a simple story is becoming complicated. A maintenance worker cleared his throat. "Ma'am, all primary service routing references this easement." Victoria shot him a look that stopped him cold. The worker immediately looked down at his boots. Another flicker rolled through the boardwalk lights. Several guests groaned. One of the restaurant managers hurried outside and spoke into a radio. Across the marina, a digital reservation display blinked off and then restarted. Small problems. Annoying problems. The kind that should not happen during a grand opening. Unless the system underneath was never fully understood. Victoria stepped toward me again. The confidence was fading faster now. "You planned this," she said quietly. I looked around at the resort. The cabins. The marina. The restaurant. The packed parking lot. Months of construction. Millions of dollars. Hundreds of signed contracts. "No," I said. "I warned you." Her jaw tightened. She remembered. Years ago, before any of these buildings existed, she visited my cabin 3 different times. Each visit came with a larger offer. Each offer came with more urgency. During the last meeting, she brought development sketches and traffic projections. She spread them across my kitchen table while rain tapped against the windows. I told her the same thing I told her every time. The shoreline was not available. The easements were not available. The control corridor was not available. She smiled politely that day. Then she proceeded as if I had never spoken. A sharp electronic chirp interrupted the silence. Everyone turned. One of the maintenance tablets had displayed an alert. The supervisor read it. His face drained of color. Another employee leaned over his shoulder. Neither looked pleased. Victoria immediately walked toward them. The group formed a tight circle. Their voices dropped low. I could not hear the words. I did not need to. Their expressions said enough. Investors were starting to notice. Reporters were definitely noticing. Cameras had quietly shifted away from the ribbon ceremony and toward the shoreline. The story was moving. Nobody had cut the ribbon yet. Nobody seemed interested anymore. The commissioner approached me carefully. "Mr. Walker," he said, "exactly how many systems run through that easement?" I looked at the pump house. Then at the marina. Then at the restaurant beyond it. The afternoon suddenly felt much quieter. "More than they think," I said. Then someone from the title company started running toward us. The man from the title company moved so fast he nearly slipped on the grass. His tie was loose. His face was red. He looked nothing like the polished executive who had been shaking hands an hour earlier. Every conversation around him stopped. Even Victoria turned. The man reached the shoreline and bent forward with his hands on his knees. He was breathing hard. "Victoria," he said, "we need to talk. Right now." She stepped toward him immediately. The crowd watched them move a short distance away. Not far enough. Their voices stayed low, but panic has a way of showing itself without words. The title officer kept pointing toward the folder in my hand. Then toward the utility marker. then toward the resort. Victoria crossed her arms. He shook his head. She said something sharp. He shook his head again. Harder this time. The county commissioner glanced at me. "What is happening?" he asked. I watched the two of them argue beside the shoreline. The sunlight reflected off the lake behind them. The water looked calm. The people standing around it did not. Someone is finally asking the right questions, I said. A light breeze rippled across the marina. The smell of fresh paint drifted from the rental cabins. Beyond them, reporters were already repositioning their cameras. The ribbons still hung untouched across the entrance. Nobody cared about it anymore. One of the maintenance supervisors walked toward the commissioner carrying a tablet. He showed him the screen. The commissioner's eyebrows rose immediately. Then he looked back at me. Another piece had clicked into place. The supervisor swallowed. "The utility records do not match the development plans," he said. His voice was careful, professional, but nervous. "How far off are they?" the commissioner asked. The supervisor hesitated. "Far enough that legal will want to review everything." A low murmur spread through the crowd. Investors began making phone calls. Realtors stopped smiling. Several guests quietly moved away from the shoreline as if distance alone could protect them from paperwork. Victoria returned a few moments later. The confidence she had worn all afternoon was gone. Not completely, but enough. Her assistant followed close behind, carrying two phones now. Both were ringing. Neither seemed to bring good news. Victoria stopped in front of me. "You have been planning this for months." I looked at the lake. A pair of ducks drifted near the far bank. Completely unaware that millions of dollars were hanging in the balance. "No," I said. "I spent months hoping someone would notice before today." Her eyes narrowed. That answer landed harder than an accusation. Because it was true. I had sent letters. I had made calls. I had requested meetings. Every road seemed to end in silence. Every warning disappeared into someone else's filing cabinet. Then came the discovery that changed everything. The old steel safe inside my grandfather's cabin, hidden beneath a workbench that had not moved in decades. Inside were documents nobody expected to exist anymore. Original surveys, easement agreements, engineering records, correspondence. Some yellowed with age, some still crisp. Together they told a story that never matched the official version. Victoria knew it now. The title company knew it now. The commissioner was beginning to understand it too. Then a black sedan pulled into the parking lot, and every face turned toward it. The black sedan rolled to a stop beside the main entrance. Its engine clicked softly as it cooled. Every eye followed it. Reporters lifted their cameras. Investors paused their phone calls. Even the band had stopped playing. The driver stepped out first. Then a woman in a dark navy suit emerged from the back seat carrying a leather case. I recognized her immediately. So did Victoria. The change in Victoria's posture was instant. Her shoulders stiffened. Her assistant looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. The woman walked across the parking lot without hesitation. Her shoes clicked against the pavement. She ignored the crowd. Ignored the cameras. Ignored the unfinished ribbon ceremony. She came directly toward the shoreline. The county commissioner exhaled slowly. I did not know they were sending someone. Neither did I. That made it interesting. The woman stopped beside us and looked at the utility marker. Then she looked at the folder in my hand. "Mr. Walker?" she asked. "Yes." She extended her hand. "Rebecca Lawson. Regional Legal Review." A ripple moved through the crowd. People might not understand easements or surveys. They understood lawyers. Especially unexpected lawyers. Rebecca opened her leather case and removed several documents. Thick files. Official seals. Copies of records. She turned toward Victoria. "We need to discuss several discrepancies." Victoria crossed her arms. "This is hardly the place." Rebecca did not react. Unfortunately, this is exactly the place. The lake breeze lifted the corners of the paperwork. Nearby, a reporter moved closer. Then another. Questions were already forming. Victoria glanced around and realized she no longer controlled the room. Or the shoreline. Or the conversation. Rebecca opened one file and began comparing pages. Her finger moved down columns of parcel references and utility records. Then she stopped. The silence lasted only a few seconds. It felt much longer. That cannot be correct, Victoria said. Rebecca looked up. That depends which records you trust. The title company representative lowered his head. He already knew where this was heading. The commissioner took another step closer. The crowd followed. The entire grand opening had transformed into something else. Something far more expensive. Rebecca requested my survey copies. I handed them over. The old paper felt rough against my fingertips. She compared them carefully against the documents in her case. The only sounds came from the water and the distant hum of generators. Then she nodded once. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. Just once. It was enough. The title officer closed his eyes. Victoria stared at the shoreline. The maintenance supervisor stared at the ground. Several investors immediately started making new phone calls. Faster now. Urgent calls. The kind people make when risk suddenly becomes real. Rebecca slid one document from her file and placed it on top. A red county seal marked the corner. Fresh. Recent. Official. I had never seen that document before. Neither had Victoria. The moment she read the first line, everything changed. Victoria read the first line twice. Then a third time. The color drained from her face completely. Around us, the crowd pressed closer. Nobody wanted to miss what was happening now. The lake breeze rattled the edges of the paperwork in Rebecca Lawson's hand. Somewhere behind the restaurant, a service cart beeped while backing up. It sounded strangely loud against the silence that had settled over the shoreline. Victoria looked up. This document was never filed. Rebecca's expression did not change. It was filed. She tapped the county seal. It was simply overlooked during subsequent reviews. The title company representative let out a slow breath. He looked like a man watching a bridge collapse while still standing on it. Rebecca turned another page. Then another. Each movement seemed to tighten the atmosphere around us. Investors stopped pretending they were not listening. Reporters moved closer. Cameras remained fixed on the growing circle beside the utility marker. Victoria reached for the papers. Rebecca handed them over. For several moments the only sound came from turning pages. Then Victoria stopped. Her eyes froze on a diagram. I knew exactly which one. The original infrastructure survey. The one discovered inside my grandfather's safe. The survey that connected the shoreline, the easements, the utility corridor, and the service systems into a single chain of ownership references. Separate pieces had always looked harmless. Together they told a different story. Victoria lowered the papers slowly. This affects more than the utility corridor. Rebecca nodded once. The commissioner frowned. How much more? Rebecca looked toward the marina. Then toward the cabins. Then toward the restaurant overlooking the water. Nobody liked the answer before she even gave it. Potentially all of it. The words landed harder than any accusation. Several people immediately stepped away from the shoreline. Phones appeared everywhere. Calls started. Fast. Urgent. Investors moved into small groups. Lawyers were suddenly very popular. The title company representative rubbed his forehead. His assistant was already typing messages into a tablet. The maintenance supervisor stared across the property as though seeing it for the first time. Victoria looked directly at me. There was no confidence left now. No polished smile. No community leader speech. Just a person realizing the foundation beneath years of planning was shifting. You knew, she said. You let this continue. The accusation hung in the air. I thought about the letters, the meetings, the warnings, the phone calls that vanished into silence. I thought about every opportunity someone had to stop and verify the records. I gave people chances to look, I said. Nobody wanted to. The commissioner swallowed hard. He understood that part. Public records only help when someone reads them. Rebecca closed her case. The click echoed across the shoreline. Small. Final. Deliberate. Until ownership is fully reviewed, she said, I strongly recommend suspension of all operational activity. A murmur swept through the crowd. Several guests looked stunned. Others looked angry. Most looked confused. The ribbon still hung untouched at the entrance. Bright. Perfect. Meaningless. Victoria stared at it for a long moment. Then her phone rang. She checked the screen. Whatever name appeared there made her eyes widen. Victoria stared at her phone for 2 long seconds before answering. The crowd watched every movement. The lake breeze had cooled. Clouds drifted across the afternoon sun. The bright reflections dancing across the marina began to fade. Yes, she said quietly. Then she stopped speaking. Her expression changed again. Not anger. Not frustration. Something heavier. Reality. When the call ended, she lowered the phone slowly. Around us, investors were already gathering in small circles. Lawyers were arriving on speakerphones. Reporters were sending live updates. The celebration was gone. In its place stood a room full of people trying to understand how they had missed something so important. Rebecca Lawson closed her file and looked toward the county commissioner. A temporary suspension order is being reviewed, she said, until ownership verification is completed. The commissioner nodded. Nobody argued. Not anymore. The evidence had grown too large. The title company representative stepped forward next. His voice sounded tired. Additional records have been located. A murmur spread through the crowd. He removed several documents from his briefcase. More surveys. More easement maps. More filings. Every one of them pointed in the same direction. Every one of them connected back to the same shoreline. The same utility corridor. The same chain of ownership. The truth had been sitting there the entire time, buried under assumptions and ignored warnings. Victoria looked toward the water. The marina behind her suddenly felt different. Not because the buildings had changed. Because the story had. For years she believed ownership was a formality that would eventually bend to development. She believed money, momentum, and influence would carry the day. The lake had different plans. A reporter finally asked the question everyone wanted answered. Mr. Walker, why wait until now? The cameras turned toward me. The crowd did too. I looked across the shoreline. Past the docks. Past the cabins. Past the restaurant standing where my grandfather once stored fishing gear. Because the records were always available, I said. People just needed to read them. Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that arrives when nobody has a better answer. Rebecca nodded slightly. The commissioner looked down at the documents again. Victoria never said a word. Not then. The ribbon remained stretched across the entrance. Untouched. Uncut. Useless. One by one, guests began leaving. Then investors. Then contractors. The music never started again. Weeks later, the reviews confirmed what the original records had shown all along. The shoreline, easements, and the core infrastructure corridor traced back to my family's ownership. Operations stopped. Contracts were rewritten. Lawsuits followed. The grand opening became a case study nobody wanted attached to their name. As for Walker Lake, the water remained exactly where it had always been. Calm. Patient. Unimpressed by speeches or brochures. I returned to the old cabin not long after. The same cabin where the steel safe had waited quietly beneath a dusty workbench for decades. I stood on the porch at sunset and listened to the waves tap against the shore. The lake had outlasted every argument. In the end, It did not need revenge. It only needed the truth. Justice is not loud. It is patient. And sooner or later it gets read.